All right, welcome to Halitics. Thanks so much for joining me, and I am especially grateful, appreciative of my guests. We welcome back Charlie Cooper from Get Money Out Maryland. You can see the website link there, URL getmoneyoutmd.org. I'll welcome Charlie in one moment. I just want to let folks know that we did have a pretty robust chat yesterday during my live stream. I apologized for not responding to some of the comments, but I've got that chat up right now. So if you do chat at any point, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns that you'd rather express via the chat, please do. And hopefully Charlie or I can respond. And you are always welcome when I'm live, as I am now, of course, to call in 240-363-7190. Oh, and don't forget, click like, click subscribe. Charlie, I took up some of your time there. I apologize. Welcome back to the Halitics Hour.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Hal. And it's good to be back on a day when we can talk about something that's pretty positive, even though, of course, it's not. There's a few clouds in the sky, but it's a pretty nice sky.
All right, so you can see we posted there for you the decision by the Supreme Court last week. And Charlie, you're a Supreme Court watcher. Your position as a nonprofit chair goes specifically to the Supreme Court's decisions on money, on finance, and on voting rights. GetMoneyOutMD.org. You watched the court deliberate, in this case with trepidation. What did you expect, and then what happened that, as you said, makes you feel pretty positive right now?
Yeah. So, like everyone, I expected them to find another way to weaken the Voting Rights Act and say that, in some far off Ku Klux Klan led world, there used to be racial discrimination, but now we don't have that. And that's sort of what they said 10 years ago when they threw out Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And the 10th anniversary is coming up next week. But in fact, they upheld Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. I would like to take a minute, if I could, Hal, to sort of put this whole thing in context of why Get Money Out Maryland is focused on the court. So we have huge threats to democracy. We have Trump and violent fascism that are, just give me 11,000 votes and other kinds of election denialism. But we also have the war machine in the deep state. Since 9/11, the U.S. has developed the capacity to read or listen to every message you send. And the Democrats don't seem to have a problem with that. We've spent $8 trillion on failed wars and killed 900,000 people in foreign countries, according to the Brown University Cost of War Project. And we have millions of U.S. soldiers with physical and mental injuries, causing havoc in this country too. And during this whole period, corporate profits have soared as a percentage of the national economic output, as wages and capital investment have stagnated or even declined. So underlying all this is the Citizens United and the rise of dark money and unlimited corporate spending. And a little piece of that, U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has really done a good job of highlighting, is a right-wing dark money network that captured the Supreme Court over several decades. Also, they just received a $1.6 billion donation, so they have more to spend in the upcoming decade than they spent in the past 2 or 3 decades. And they've done all kinds of corrupt stuff, and some of it's legal corruption, and some of it probably wasn't legal, but they're not being held accountable. So this,
Charlie, I just want to interrupt you for one second because I want to make sure I understand this. Who got that multi-million-dollar contribution? What organization? For
billion.
Multi-billion. Which that wasn't
$6 billion.
That wasn't the Supreme Court, was it?
No, it's Leonard Leo, who is the leader. He's a vice president of the Federalist Society, and then he's founded I don't know how many, 10 or 20 so-called social welfare organizations that are 501c4s that don't have to identify their donors. And they pass the money around amongst themselves to get around the limits on political spending. And they wine and dine the justices. I mean, I don't know how many hundred trips they got for the one that was it Scalia that liked hunting so much. Um, anyway, and then now we have the Thomas scandal, and there's probably more. So they are, and while they do that, of course, they have the chance to foist their views upon them. And we've all seen the picture of Clarence Thomas at the Harlem Crow uh, resort in upstate New York. Uh, so this is an alliance of religious and social conservatives with big money, right? And Trump made an explicit deal with these people. I mean, we don't have the tape of that, but you know, that's he got a lot of conservative money that he probably wouldn't normally have gotten once he promised to do what they wanted with the Supreme Court. And then he got 3 justices appointed, so-called justices. So our group, Get Money Out Maryland, we've been fighting to guarantee political equality, including an affirmative right to vote, which is not in the Constitution, to end corporate constitutional rights and regulate big money in politics. And now we see that the Supreme Court, of course, they generated the Citizens United decision, but they were also an enemy of political equality in many, many ways. But here we have in this decision, Roberts, again, as he's done a few times in the past, trying to keep some public respectability and not get so far right of the populace.
Do you think that Roberts was able to influence Kavanaugh as well to join him with the 3 so-called liberal justices?
Yeah.
And I say so-called, I just want to say, because we have seen decisions by those 3 justices that, to my mind, aren't liberal. Certainly they're better significantly in most decisions than the conservatives, but and I'm just going to harken back to one I discussed here, Charlie, without you. They did rule, I believe, all 3 or maybe 2 of the 3 so-called liberals or the liberal wing, that the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York was just in appointing a special private prosecutor to charge a climate activist when the Justice Department refused to bring charges. And actually, I believe it was Gorsuch and Kavanaugh who managed, I shouldn't say all 3, it was a 7-2 decision against the progressive activist. And the only 2 who supported the appellant were those 2, the Gorsuch and
then there was
and
a recent
Kavanaugh.
one about the union and the cement mixing trucks, which seems sort of ridiculous.
So maybe
those are the liberal justices.
As a court expert, how influential is Chief Justice Roberts when it comes, especially to those 2?
Yeah, I really I don't know how, but I you read these decisions, and there are all these legal doctrines, and if you pay enough attention, you can make them make sense. But I don't really think at base that's what drives it. I think that the public reaction drives it more. That's just my opinion, because I've always been someone who believes that movement building is the key, and not manipulation of ideas as much, and through the media or whatever. I think we have to build a movement, and hopefully discussions like this can be part of that. Absolutely, and I think there are four prongs of what we would support and are trying to build, support for. Uh, the mandatory ethics protocol, and there are three or four bills in the U.S. Senate. So some of them are in the House too. Um, but of course, there's no chance in the House right now to pass anything about the Supreme Court. Um, and then expanding the number of justices. And the court decided 59 cases this session, or will have decided 59 cases. And in the 1900s, they could decide way over 100 cases. So somehow the computer age has slowed them down greatly. So I think there ought to be a bigger court, and they shouldn't. Yeah, well, they shouldn't have to have all the justices sit on every case. In other words, if they had 13 justices and
Oh, I
they
see.
convened seven justice panels, they could do more work.
That's fascinating. That's an interesting thought.
They could, and then, one thing they say about recusal, which should be part of the ethics protocols. Oh, well, we can't recuse because then we won't have enough justices. But if they had 13 justices, somebody could recuse, or even two people could recuse. It wouldn't be a problem. And so, yes, expand the number of justices, impose term limits, uh, and and in the Constitution, the Congress has the authority to remove jurisdiction from the Supreme Court. In fact, this is a good thing uh, wrapped in dirty toilet paper, unfortunately, and that is uh, the Congress just used its authority to limit the Supreme Court's jurisdiction. And what did they use it for? The Mountain Valley Pipeline. But they actually used it for something good, which is the ability to waive regulation. So there were two provisions of the recent debt ceiling deal that said no court can review this, and they ought to maybe look at using that more often for good and not for evil.
All right, so we're kind of having a little bit of a wide-ranging discussion about the court on a general level, but let us focus on the decision that I
Exactly.
invite you to discuss, and I certainly am the one who digressed, so I apologize for that. 5-4 decision. I highlighted what I thought was interesting in the SCOTUS blog, which I think did an excellent job describing this decision and giving some history as well. I think you referred that link to me, Charlie, so thank you for that.
Right.
What is highlighted as most important, according to the SCOTUS blog, and it seems like it is to me as well, that the court didn't make it more difficult. They didn't raise the bar or set a higher requirement for plaintiffs or challengers to prevail who question the constitutionality of a particular voting scheme.
Right. So this is a racial gerrymandering case, and gerrymandering is a part of the cause of the extreme polarization in U.S. politics because it puts the power into the hands of party loyalists who vote in primary elections. The turnout is very low, 20%, 30%. Um, and so, in 1965, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act. It was their first action to enforce the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment says, and Congress can enforce this, voting rights for African Americans by action, but it took them 90 years, and so they weakened it in 2013 by getting rid of the pre-clearance, which had uh, restricted formerly Confederate states and a few other areas from changing their voting rights rules without Department of Justice. But then in this case, they said that we ought to give a lot of weight to sticking with our past decisions. So they've been criticized roundly for throwing out priority. And Kavanaugh specifically said uh, uh, that we ought to give more weight uh, uh, to statutory interpretation precedents than to constitutional precedents, because the Congress is free to act. And they in 1980, the court had weakened the Voting Rights Act, and in 82, the Congress acted. So what they're saying is the 82 bipartisan amendments of Congress created the standards we use today, and we're going to stick with them.
What's your sense of that? Do you think that it's, for the way you describe it, that sounds reasonable? Sounds like Kavanaugh got that right.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I just, I question the ultimate integrity of these people, in other words, is this what he truly believes in his heart, or did he and Roberts get scared of themselves when they saw the virulent reaction to some of the things they've done recently, and when they see this Thomas scandal, where, and even now after the scandal, he hasn't filed his he hasn't
provided the financial statement
of his income and everything.
Right.
His wife's getting $100,000 a year from the same right-wing network that's, taking him to Indonesia. And I mean, it's unbelievable. So I think,
do you think
yes, trying to figure out their motives is above my pay grade.
Charlie, when I look at this decision, though, it doesn't strike me as having the same implications on the corporate elites as some of the other decisions. In other words, I'm not sure that if I'm a billionaire, I really care very much one way or the other when it comes to this decision.
That's a very good point, Hal. And I think that, so now this could mean probably, and according to others who watch this more closely than I do, 3, 4, 5 seats are going to go from R to D. In Texas, Texas got 2 more seats in the House of Representatives, and it was their population growth led the nation, and the vast majority of their population growth, was in Hispanic voters, and they don't have any more Hispanic seats. Now, the court is very clear. There's not some automatic proportionality, but they have this complicated test for when not giving seats to a minority seems to be extending the discriminatory and racist past of the United States. So court watchers are saying Louisiana, Georgia, and Texas may each lose a Republican seat. Texas may lose 2. They have very similar lawsuits. And then Arkansas, people just filed to revive an Arkansas lawsuit that was dismissed, saying, well, this is the same as Allen v. Milligan. So it probably will have a considerable impact on Congress.
Well, let me just,
in the long run,
go ahead.
The basic Republican strategy predicted by Lyndon Johnson when the Voting Rights Act passed, which was Nixon's Southern strategy, it can't last forever, because demographically they're trying to deny Hispanics and Black citizens and young people the vote as long as they can. Later, they'll have to give up.
Well, I mean, they're trying other tactics as well. And we are seeing the Republican Party, at least in the last election, it seems as though they made significant inroads with Latino voters and maybe African American males. We're starting to move that. I know you and I have debated that a little bit, but it seems that there's more than anecdotal evidence that at least some African American men did vote in slightly higher numbers for Trump in 2020 than in 2016. But
on the other hand, the Trump scares enough people in those communities that the turnout effect swamps the shift effect, or at least it did last time.
Well, in any event, I just did put up a section of the Voting Rights Act too, so folks can see that as well. Mm-hmm. And it's exactly as you indicated.
Mhm.
Charlie, one factor to be considered is whether the new map reduces the number of representatives of a particular protected class below their representation in the general population. So if you have a population that's 20% African American or 20% Latino, and there's one out of 35 representatives, if it's a state with a lot of representatives like Texas or California, then obviously that wouldn't be proportional. So it's something to be looked at, but you don't have an absolute right to the same number
Right.
of
There has
seats.
to be a past history. The minority has to be concentrated geographically so that you can make a compact, non-gerrymandered looking district. And there has to be, they have to vote sort of cohesively in a certain direction, and then the white majority has to vote against them to thwart their
Well, and
representation.
is that and I made a point, and I think I'm going to withdraw it, where I said I'm not sure the billionaire class is going to care very much. If given how close Congress is divided right now, and given that although plenty of billionaires vote for Democrats, and Democrats are clearly beholden to the billionaire class, I think in general billionaires prefer and feel a little bit more comfortable in the Republican Party, if anything, if only because they feel they're a little more secure. Um, they're less likely, right, to jump
Right.
ship.
Yeah.
So I guess it does matter to the billionaire class. Uh,
Some.
but my concern is this, and Justice Thomas does allude to this, that we are making assumptions that, or we're putting people in camps based on their race rather than trying to appeal to people based on their shared interests that might cross racial lines.
Well, yes, and Justice Thomas and some of the other Republican so-called justices, and the state of Alabama put forward this idea of color blindness. So what it is they've staked the Republicans have staked their whole strategy on color and age a little bit, and then they find some algorithm that doesn't look like it depends on color, and then they say, "Oh, we're colorblind." But I think in this decision, the point that Justice Brown Jackson keeps making, which is no, all these the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments were exactly not colorblind. They were to correct a racial injustice. So, but uh, there is a dark cloud in this decision, which is stated most clearly by Kavanaugh in his little 4-pager. That, and he says, even if Congress in 1982, which was the amendment I referred to, could constitutionally authorize race-based redistricting under Section 2 for some period of time, the authority to conduct race-based redistricting cannot extend indefinitely into the future. So evidently he agrees with Martin Luther King that the arc of the universe bends toward justice, but does it? It depends on us as citizens and whether we get organized and mobilized. And so, and then he says, Alabama did not raise that temporal argument in this court, and I therefore would not consider it at this time. So that's an invitation to some state to basically say, again, as they did 10 years ago, well, racism is over, and and Section 2 is unconstitutional because we don't have that kind of racism. And we don't, when people went to Mississippi in 1964 to try to register voters, and the percent of African Americans registered in Mississippi was something like 2%. We don't have that. What is being done now with racial gerrymandering is to try to get a 1 or 2% advantage instead of to get, 98% of African Americans not to be able to register to vote. But still, any of this racial discrimination should be unconstitutional. That's what the 15th Amendment was about. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Well, on the one hand, it's a well-founded concern. On the other hand, if you look at the last 3 or 4 decades, there's no question that despite what I think is fair to say the Democratic Party's abandonment of the working class, um, still the Republicans are way, way worse for the working class. The Republicans have done all the horrible tax cuts for the rich. They did the Reagan tax cuts. They did the Bush the Dumber tax cuts in the early 2000s, and then they did the Trump tax cuts. And the cumulative effect of that is like $1 billion a year in lost revenue. And then this provides a ratchet to cut social programs, which benefit everyone, but of course benefit the working class more than they benefit the better off classes. So on the other hand, the Democrats never repeal these things when they have the chance. Obama had the chance in 2010 in the lame duck session to repeal some tax cuts, didn't bring it up.
Well, I would also posit that Trump's opinion, by the way, folks, sorry, I had my mic muted for a moment. Charlie could hear me, but you could not. I have to fix that because usually my guests could say, I can't hear you. What's going on here? But he could, so he didn't know, but I know viewers couldn't. So I apologize for that, folks. I would argue, though, and the discussion here is whether relying on race gives the Democrats an out to not to discuss class. And I would argue that Trump's appeal, I mean, he was up against a bunch of traditional Republicans. And he did make populist arguments in 2016 and to a lesser degree in 2020. He was filling a vacuum that, let's face it, Democrats have left for a, I don't want to exactly say savvy, but at least, I mean, a demagogic Republican.
Right. And he certainly appeals to mostly to their baser instincts. But I think one thing, so if you watch any mainstream media, which I try not to, but I mean, I watch a little teeny bit, but if you watch CNN or MSNBC or PBS or any of those, when you see a Trump rally, you'll only see the dumbest things he says. But I think if my sense of it is if you were actually at the rally, he says things that connect with people, and they're not all racist dog whistles. I mean, it's
well, he got standing applause at the town hall in New Hampshire when he said when he was pressed on whether he support a really stupid question, do you support Ukraine? Do you want Ukraine or Russia to win the war? And he was pressed to answer, and he said, I want people not to die. And when he said that, he got very loud applause. Mm-hmm. And that is not what in general has been presented of his responses.
He doesn't care if people die.
Well, he may not, but I mean, I can't. He
knows what to say.
We can't read. Sure. I can't read people's minds. I go by what we can look at what they do, but Charlie, we could argue this back and forth. I would say that when it comes to foreign policy, Trump was really no worse than his two predecessors.
He wasn't. His behavior wasn't worse than the Democrats. And by the way, Obama actually ratcheted down. Now, Trump did shovel money to the Pentagon way, way too fast, much more than Obama. And then Biden decided he had to beat Trump at that, and that's a horrible thing about Biden. What Biden has done for the working class is, with some exceptions, he's way better on unionism. His appointments to the NLRB are way better. His appointments to Justice Department decisions that might, be enforcing any of that, way better. And his antitrust position is way, way better. He's got Lena Khan at the Federal Trade Commission, and he's got Gary Gensler at the Securities Exchange Commission. These people are doing really great stuff. If it can be continued, it's enough to make me hope that Democrats would continue in office. But on the foreign policy and defense side, it's pretty horrible.
Charlie Cooper with us, Get Money Out Maryland, getmoneyoutmd.org. So do you think the money in politics explains the bad defense policies you just described by the Democrats and the worse domestic policies by the Republicans? Although we've seen those long before we had some of these bad Supreme Court decisions.
Listen, you take a guy right off Raytheon's board and you make him Secretary of Defense. And then when this war breaks out, which, is an unjust war in terms of Russia's invasion, but at the same time, NATO expansion was a provocation. I mean, two things that don't go in the same direction can be true. And in this case, they are true. And so in April of 22, when Zelensky started talking about a compromise where Ukraine would join NATO, they trot Austin over there, and we weren't in the room, but it looks like he told Zelensky to shut up about that. And Zelensky changed his tune very, very much. And we're never dealing with them. We're never giving up any territory. The extension of this war, the longer this war lasts, the more money Raytheon and the others make. There's only 5 major defense weapons makers, and they're getting hundreds of billions every year, tens of billions of profit. And whatever they spend on money in politics, it's totally pocket change to them. And the return is,
it's manyfold.
You invest your money and get 5 or 10%, you're doing great. The return on this money invested in political influence is thousands of percent.
Oh, it's so disappointing too. I mean, I've tried so hard, Charlie, to get people to look at Jamie Raskin with a slightly jaundiced eye. I mean, he took an award at a conference sponsored by Lockheed Martin. I played the video of him saying that he's criticized other wars. He's voted against some Pentagon budgets. He's voted for every appropriation requested for military supplies to be distributed to Ukraine, that we must defeat Putin, making it very personal as opposed to what are we going to do to end this, try to stop it. And I mean, I don't know what you do with that. I mean, if voters aren't going to see this, if they're not going to see that this is a problem, I don't know what's the point of doing this.
Well, anyway, yeah, the money in politics is a part of it. I believe they want to test out their weapons. They want to use up as many of these weapons as they can, so they have to be replaced and all that. That's a terrible, terrible thing. And Ukrainians get to die for it.
And Russians too. I mean, they're both dying. Yeah. It's terrible. All right. So real quick, we're going to jump back to the case. I thought this was a very positive. You talked about positive aspects of the Alabama voting rights case. So, Roberts, I think very rightly, and I don't see there's anything in 2 that says you have to be intending to discriminate. I think it was good that he made very clear, no, I don't care what you say, Thomas. There's no requirement of an intent to discriminate. So this was positive. I also thought it was interesting, and I was looking at the writing, and I want to just put this up real quick. Let's see if we can get it, where Thomas said that the question is not about redistricting. That's irrelevant. The only thing that matters is access to the voting booth. But again, if you look at the plain language of 2, that's not correct. It's just not right. I mean, he says Section 2 does not apply, but only regulating access to the ballot or the counting of the ballot. But it's clearly not the case when voting, when Section 2 specifies the percentage of representatives from a particular group is something to be considered.
Right, it's everything. It's everything that's required to make your vote effective, and who the candidates that you can consider is something that's required to make your vote effective. I would like to point out, though, that we still have no progress on partisan gerrymandering, and that would be even more effective at giving us a chance at reasonable politics that dealt with the real issues more and the fake issues less. So that's something, and the Supreme Court threw up its hands and said, oh, it's above our pay grade. Evidently, you can't get a free trip for that. So the fight to get rid of partisan gerrymandering is back in the States. There is Moore v. Harper, where that hasn't been decided, where the North Carolina Supreme Court ruled that the state constitution ruled out a partisan gerrymander and told the Republican legislature to redraw their maps. They appealed. The Supreme Court is considering that, but after there was an election and Republicans took back the North Carolina Supreme Court and reversed the decision of the Democrat majority of the North Carolina Supreme Court. And so it may be that the Supreme Court will take a pass. And we should know in the next week or two, because they'll issue their decision. Court observers think they'll make some decision, or otherwise they wouldn't have taken this long to issue it.
All right, Charlie.
So it's very interesting. Are they going to moot the case? Are they going to say something? Are they going to throw out this independent state legislature theory? Says that we have checks and balances for everything except how state legislatures run federal elections. We would have checks and balances for how state legislatures legislate state elections, but we wouldn't have them for federal elections. So that makes no sense to me, and it just seems like a complete power play.
Isn't there a tension?
If it's decided, if the Supreme Court goes with independent state legislature theory, that'll be a much worse blow to democracy than if this case had been decided the other way. So we should keep our seatbelts fastened for another week or two.
All right. Well, I'll look for your emails on that next case. I have a question about this decision, and I want to move on to another topic, and you're welcome to stick with me for a few more minutes. But isn't there a tension? You brought up partisan gerrymandering. Isn't there a tension between allowing or looking at the effects on race and race representation and partisan? Because it seems to me that the assumption here is that black voters are going to be very much likely to vote Democratic, and white voters are much more likely to vote Republican. So if we're looking to try to keep them in districts where they have a majority, isn't that clearly partisan gerrymandering? I mean, you're saying we're going to have and in fact, you see it here where the decision, according to Roberts, is that you're supposed to look at communities of interest, and Roberts says the Gulf Coast region isn't really much of a community of interest, but there is a community of interest which is formerly enslaved persons, which of course I agree they have a community, they have a similar interest in certain areas, but not in all. Mm-hmm. But to the extent that we're saying we're going to keep those folks together in a district that provides them with a representative, isn't that really partisan gerrymandering, where we're herding people together based on how we expect them to vote?
I don't think it's fair to call it partisan gerrymandering, but it doesn't have the effect of reducing the hyperpartisanship. This remedy doesn't do that. And in fact, the Supreme Court test requires that the racial communities are already at odds, and that there's a history, and you can show that they're odds, and you can show that the white white voting bloc is thwarting the voting bloc of color. By the way, the term black belt refers to soil, refers to the color of the soil in a certain area of Alabama that made it particularly great for agriculture. It doesn't refer to the color of people's skin. So anyway,
which yes, and I appreciate that.
Great if we could make some progress on partisan gerrymandering.
And my question really was disingenuous, because partisan gerrymandering, as I understand it, means that a majority party in a state legislature writes districts to maximize the number of representatives from that party and to minimize from the other. This is kind of the opposite. This is saying, no, we want to have relative, proportional. But it is still disappointing, because you might have a state like Alabama, but this is true the other way in, say, California, where you have 60% Republican, 40% Democratic, but still it works out, 10-2 or however many they have, 2 or 3.
In the state of what? What state are you talking about?
Alabama. Wouldn't you say it's about 60-40? You think it's a little more 65-35 Republican? I don't know.
Oh, I don't know what the partisan thing is. Alabama has 7 seats in the House, and so they have the map they drew had 6 white districts,
and this way they'll have 5, I assume, and 2,
and they'll have 5 white districts, right?
So it's about 40%,
and it'll break down DNR.
All right, let's. Anything further you want to say on this SCOTUS? Because I do want to just quickly talk about Dr. West's run for president, now as a Green, as well as on the People's Party ticket, if there is even such a thing.
Come to getmoneyoutmd.org and sign up, and you can be on our phone calls as we plan how to push our political equality agenda forward and oppose corporate tax breaks and corporate constitutional rights, and someday to regulate big money in politics.
All right, that's awesome. Tireless advocate of, I guess we'd say, taint. You'll never free politics of taint, but at least a freer from the taint of money politics than we have now, which I hardly could be worse, I fear. All right, so you're going to stick with me, Charlie, for a moment as we play. Let's get to this clip here, if I can, and I have it say slides at bottom. I don't see me on that video, though. Let's see, why don't I? Oh, and gas show slides at right. Here we are. So, I'm having trouble. I'm struggling here a little bit. Let's get Dr. West. So here's the announcement, and I have been saying, folks, if you watch my show, that I like Dr. West's candidacy. I like Dr. West. I look forward to having an opportunity to vote for him, but I was troubled by the fact that he was running on the People's Party platform or on the People's Party ticket, and there isn't even really a real legitimate People's Party. I was hoping he would run as a Green. Here he is. Let's play the clip.
I wanted to ask you, of course, about your presidential run, and there's some exciting news, I believe. So last week, Chris Hedges, friend of the show, Chris Hedges, said during an event for Workers Strike Back, which was organized by Kshama Sawant, he said that he wanted you to run as a Green Party candidate. And you, of course, when you announced you were with the Movement for the People's Party, the MPP. Do you have an update about this?
Oh yes, no, that process is very much uh, uh, in movement, and I look forward to it. You know, I'll always have gratitude for the tremendous work of the volunteers of the People's Party and so forth. But there was so much going on internally, and therefore we had to be able to keep the focus where it belongs. And so I am still deeply committed to a broad coalitional sensibility and a united front. And so I invite a variety of different organizations, and that includes the People's Party. But I'm certainly moving in the not just toward, but want to look forward to being a part of the nomination process of the Green Party. And I look forward to being able to already be in very rich conversation with my dear brother Barack and my dear sister Stein, sister Jill, and brother Ajamu, who I have great love and respect for. So that's true. That is new, and which means when it comes to infrastructure and institution, it's much broader and deeper. Access to the ballot, much broader. But in the end, as you know, any candidacy to run the empire in order to dismantle the empire has to be part of a movement. So it's really a moment in a much larger movement, domestic as well as international, to keep the focus on precious poor and precious working people wherever.
All right, so I cut it off there, Charlie. I am excited about Dr. West. I am not excited about the two candidates challenging Joe Biden in the Democratic primary. I'd like your take, including whether you would prefer for him to run, at least in the first instance, in the Democratic primary.
Well, I just don't think that this is something that will make a whole lot of difference. But if he can talk about dismantling the empire and make it real to people how it hurts them, that would be a good thing, and that would be a good use of the presidential primary process to or the general election process to educate people. So I'm for that. It would be great if the Green Party could be competitive in the congressional elections, but they haven't proved to be, and maybe once or twice, but rarely.
Virtually no competition for the duopoly. And in the past, I've taken a position, certainly when it was Ralph Nader, that it would have been far, far better for him to run for Congress or to run for a state office rather than to siphon votes away from Al Gore. And I stand by that position. I think it was proven correct. I think it's a little different today because of the concerns you've raised about the Democratic Party's allegiance to the war machine, which I don't think was quite as clear in 2000. I also think there was a greater difference between the two parties, perhaps because Citizens United hadn't been decided right at that point. So maybe there was slightly more.
It's hard to believe that Al Gore would have gone into Iraq in the same way.
Well, and he was also
on the other hand, he played a bad role in Central America.
I'm not aware of that, so you're educating me here. He certainly was the most of prominent high elected officials, has spoken more eloquently about the climate catastrophe than any other.
Yes,
of whom I'm aware. So I think those are all positives. I'm not truly concerned about. I understand there's some people who fear that West would take votes away from Biden. That's not something that troubles me at this point. I do ask you, do you see, what role do you see, if any, in the current climate, a challenge to Joe Biden, either in the Democratic primary or in the general election?
I just really don't know. I fear very much that he's going to have a heck of a time getting reelected. And I do think that age is a factor. I mean, I'm 75 and he's 78. And do I feel like I would have the energy to be president? No, absolutely not. And I seems to me he's obviously slowing down, and people are seeing this. I think that's a big part of the lack of approval. He has other deficits in terms of presenting himself as a politician beyond the issue deficits that we've been discussing. And as I say, he does have some real issue positives that no Democratic president has had since FDR. I don't know. I try to pay more attention to building movements than to who's running for this or that, because it takes now way over $1 billion to run for president. And, I just don't know. I mean, I don't know what Cornel West or anyone can accomplish other than educating some people and creating the day when the switch is flipped. There'll be a tipping point and this country will go in a progressive direction. I don't know when it is, but every single person that you can educate does make a difference.
All right, we're wrapping up.
Whether it'll show up in this election, I doubt that.
We're going to wrap up Halitics now with Charlie Cooper. Really appreciate having him on as my guest. And my final question, I'm going to let you have the final word. I know you said you're not much of an election watcher, but somebody said to me the other day, and I can't remember who it was, I'm trying to remember, that they didn't even believe Biden was going to run. They were convinced, for the reasons you stated, the age slowing down, evidently slowing down. And just to make it clear, I mean, there's a lot of reasons not to vote for Donald Trump, and age is also one of those. He is in his late 70s. Yeah. Doesn't appear that he's slowed down to the degree that Biden has, and he's not as old as Biden, but you can throw that on the pile as well. And Bernie also is quite is almost as old. Both of them. Is he? I thought he was a little younger than Biden, but I think you're right. Stand corrected. So do you think, is there any doubt in your mind that Biden will run? And if you do doubt it, so then who do you think would run in his place?
I don't have any idea. Okay. I mean, my present favorite mainstream politician is Sheldon Whitehouse. I can't imagine that he'd have that kind of clout, but he's pretty right on the issues he's talking about.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Charlie. Remember, this is Halitics. I'll be back tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And again, I appreciate Charlie very much. Join me. Don't forget, click like, click subscribe. Have a great afternoon. Or if you're on the different time zone and you're watching live, have a great morning. Or whenever you're watching, have a great whatever it is.